Why need your children when you can go to a nursing home and spend all your time playing cribbage with your friends?
The current medical system prioritizes just keeping people alive, which means you have a heartbeat regardless of the quality of your life. And we don't really talk about what it means to be alive.
Typically in Chinese culture, it's expected that the kids will end up taking care of their parents. My parents have always said that they don't want to burden us.
I need to have a steady salary in case my parents have a huge medical expense that is unexpected and they need like 50K, just like that. Welcome back to That 30 Show. Welcome back.
Welcome back. I'm really loving the sun.
I was just going to say, I agree, but in these past few days, it's hot. It's like getting legitimately hot. And while I like the sun, I don't do well in hot weather. So I'm like...
Yeah, I'm usually, like, if it was too hot, you know those would you rathers, if it was too hot or too cold, I would rather pick too cold. But there's something about, like, the sun brightens everyone's day. Everyone's so happy.
And I also feel like I've been a bit too optimistic about the heat too. For example, I'm looking at weather and it's like, oh, it's a high of 22. I'm like, that's blazing hot. I don't need to wear a jacket. And so actually I feel kind of down this morning.
Oh,
Again,
no.
I just recovered. Last time I got sick, it's because I went out for one of my old man walks and I forgot my jacket and I was too lazy to go back home to get my jacket. I was like, it's sunny, it's fine. And I got like a cold 2 days later.
I think a lot of people get sick in between seasons for that exact reason. It's because they don't wear jackets because they think it's too hot outside.
I'm just not sure. Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, man. Well, speaking of, getting sick easily, I can only imagine how our bodies will continue to decline as we get older. And that's something I want to unpack today. It's something I've been wanting to unpack for a while now. We've mentioned in some previous episodes, in terms of taking care of parents, hanging out with parents, the role reversal of our parents taking care of us when we were young and us taking care of our parents when we're older. I have the opinion that this is very pivotal for our 30s. I know that for you and maybe your friends, it seems like it hasn't come up as much in terms of, which is great. I mean, your parents being healthy, that's, 2 thumbs up. But is that right? Like, it's not something that you've thought about?
Not yet, but honestly, you just never know. So I haven't really started thinking about it. I mean, my parents are fairly healthy, so I haven't heard my friends talk about that either, but it's also very private. And I feel like you should be prepared because you never know, like anything could happen at any time. I mean, knock on wood, but in your 30s, I think it's best to start thinking about things like this, even though it can, I don't know, sometimes when I think about it, it gets kind of like sad and like emotional for me, right, to think about things like that. But it always helps to be prepared.
I do agree. It is a very private topic. And it just made me remember that recently I heard through the grapevine, if you will, through a friend of someone I know. And then apparently that friend I know that I'm not as close to, their mom was fighting cancer or something like that over the past few years. And I never knew that. And that's not something that they would share with anyone beyond even their closest friends, right? Because it's nobody's business. And that's why I do want to talk about it, because I imagine it's something that people might be experiencing or fearing or supporting a friend through, but it's not something that gets talked about as much. I'm not saying necessarily it needs to be talked about more, but it is something that I think people go through in their 30s and 40s. So I want to sort of get your thoughts on it. And more importantly, I read a book about it. But before that, I think we want to give a bit of a, I don't know if it's a disclaimer.
Yeah, but I was just thinking, this topic can be pretty sensitive to people. Like you said, you don't even know what people are going through with their families and things like that. And I feel like the things that we will be talking about today, things like aging parents, mortality, like things like that can invoke certain emotions in people. So just a little warning or disclaimer that we'll be talking about some of those topics today. It's important, but it's also, I think, important to let people know that that's what we're going to be doing.
Yeah. End of life. Oftentimes people have strong opinions about that, whether it's because of religious angles or just your own morals or ethics. So certainly we're just going to speak for ourselves. I've no doubt that many people listening will disagree with our preferences, with our values, and that's perfectly fine and valid, and I respect that. Anyways, with that being said, this was particularly a good time for us to chat about it because I recently finished reading a book called Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. Probably mispronounced that. I apologize. Someone who used to be a doctor. And to sum it up, I'm not going to talk about the book the entire episode, but I'm going to reference it as we go. But just to give you a sense of what the book is about in a nutshell, basically, it's sort of helping us understand that the current medical system and palliative care really prioritizes just keeping people alive, which means you have a heartbeat, and doing that for as long as possible, regardless of the quality of your life. You might have like 10 tubes stuck in you. You might be doing chemo every day, but like, it's just, are you alive? Yes, great. And we don't really talk about whether personally or medically what it means to be alive and what kind of quality of life we want when we are quote unquote alive. And what we have found through a lot of these different studies and different types of palliative care is that actually, when we do prioritize quality of life, that often ends up extending someone's time that they stay alive for the same amount of time as if you were to give them chemo. For example, let's say you do chemo and you get to stay alive for another 2 years. Well, when we address the quality of life factors for these people, let's say they don't do chemo, but they get to stay in their own home as opposed to being in hospital. They end up still living 2 more years, but those 2 years are much higher quality of life. So this topic of like, we want to stay alive, we want to take care of our loved ones, but in what condition? I think that's going to be something that really interests me, and to get your thoughts on it. Does that kind of make sense?
I mean, it sounds like a theme that we've touched on a few times now on our show about this idea of health span versus lifespan, the other book that you're talking about too. And so it sounds like it's in every stage of our lives. Like when you're young and healthy, trying to figure out what ways to like prevent diseases and things like that. But even at the end of your life, when you are, you know, about to reach the end, it's like, how long can you extend that life for versus just living a healthier life until the end. So every stage of life, there is that debate about, or not debate, I guess, but it's the health span versus lifespan conversation.
I guess, would you say that like you don't really think about it as much? Maybe you sort of already confirmed this, but you don't really think about it as much because you're like, you personally, right? You're not thinking about that. You're very young. I'm guessing you haven't thought about too much about your old life and what that would look like.
Not too much. Randomly, it'll come up inside my head, being like thinking about, you know, down the road, but it's not something that, yeah, I think about like on a regular basis. Yeah.
A point that the book made that I thought was really salient that's related to this is that after like some analysis or research or whatever, we figured that it's not actually how old you are that determines what your life priorities are. It's your perception of how much time you have left. And so if you have a young person who has a terminal illness or a young person who just survived a near-death experience, you'll find that those people often have the same priorities and focus as an old person. For example, old people, they often don't care about going on adventures, making more money. They're just like, let me spend time with my children and my grandchildren, right? But when you're younger, you're like, okay, what am I going to do next in my life? How am I going to be more successful? What are my ambitions, my goals? Because you feel like you're going to live forever. I think that's really related to your life of gratitude too, is recognizing the things that we take for granted, which is health, which is being alive. And as you said earlier, we never know, right? Knock on wood, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I actually really resonate with that. I think my mentality kind of shifted. Like I didn't have any sort of near-death experience or anything like that, but I've experienced things like that with my family. And I think that's when my mentality kind of shifted towards being more grateful, because I've seen family members go through some like things like that made me realize that's yeah.
Let's bring it back to sort of the topic at hand, which is in our 30s and perhaps 40s, we start having experiences where our parents are getting older. They're getting more vulnerable to falls, to illnesses. They're taking more trips to the hospital for checkups, and they're getting less healthy for mostly due to old age, but for other reasons. And so that's a challenge that a lot of people in their 30s face, is taking care of their parents. So the first question I had for you, do you know how your parents want to live out their old age? You said that they're healthy right now, and I'm, obviously hope that that will continue for as long as possible. But certainly as you get older, you will become less mobile, you will become less independent.
Yeah. I mean, my parents have always told me that they don't want to like burden their kids. I mean, I don't know.
Interesting. That's so interesting because your Chinese
Yeah.
culture, right?
Yeah.
That's not typical Chinese culture, would you say?
Yeah, I guess so. I think in typically in Chinese culture, it's expected that the kids will end up taking care of their parents, right? Like into old age, perhaps living with them too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my
Yeah.
parents have always said that they don't want to burden us. Like at the point of, I mean, whatever we define burden as, but to the point, like if we are stressing like financially, or we have to physically take care of them, like they've always said that they don't want that. I don't know. I don't know if they would also like want to be in some sort of like nursing home either. That part I don't know, but that's just something that they've always told me, is they don't want to burden us. So,
So they'll like probably figure it out. For example, let's say they don't want to be in a assisted living facility or nursing home, whatever you want to call it. They might like hire someone to take care of them at their own home and make sure that they have ability to do that. But at the end of the day, it sounds like they just want to make sure that that's not something that you need to worry about. They're going to take care of themselves one way or another. I find it actually really interesting, or a point that I want to highlight, the fact that they have told you that. So, because one of my questions is like, oh, have you had these conversations with your parents? So I don't know. I don't know if you've like sat down at a dinner table, had a family meeting, and be like, all right, kids. But it sounds like, they have actually brought this up. When do these conversations come up? It's not something that you would just be like, oh, good morning, by the way, don't you don't have to take care. Like, it's a pretty
it usually comes up if there's some kind of like news article that we've seen where it's that kind of topic, or like something that we saw on TV, or like if we're watching a TV show, that kind of thing. My mom would just be like, oh, I don't want that, I wouldn't want that, and things like that. So it's always been in passing. It's never like we've had this sit down conversation to talk about it. But from the few times that I've talked to her about it and that she's raised it, that has always been her sentiment. My parents have always been like very independent by nature. So maybe that's also why, like when my mom asks me to like help her with something, or like help her do something, I know it's because like she can't do it herself. Like she's tried and couldn't do it herself. Like my parents aren't people that'll just call you up whenever they need some like little thing that they need help with, If they really need help, they'll call. Otherwise, they won't.
I remember you sharing, either on air or not, that your mom's a bit of a handy woman herself. Like she likes to figure things out, fix things. She likes to learn English. Very self-starter. And I will say that seems to me, from an unscientific, uninformed perspective, that is certainly not the majority. I wouldn't say most people are like that. I'm not going to say most people are not like that, but that's a certain personality type, I think.
I would say so.
Yeah. Very interesting. I wonder if your parents' take is because they are healthy right now. Like maybe I wonder if they'll change their mind. But anyways, not your parents specifically, but people in general who might have that viewpoint. Will they feel more of a need or desire when they do require more support? Anyways, but the other angle is not just in general, as a parent, do you want or desire kids to take care of you? But those conversations about, okay, when you do get to an end of life situation, do we know what our preferences are? Let's say they are in the hospital, they're going for some surgery. At what point do you say yes or no to a certain treatment because that patient has said, oh, this is my preference for how much we try, how much we don't try? I'm guessing you haven't had those conversations.
Not really like specific stuff, but it's along the same sentiment of they don't want to be a burden. So if I can read between the lines of what they're saying, and there have been examples, but if I can read between the lines, it's like if push comes to shove and you have to spend a bunch of money, for example, for this procedure or whatever.
Right.
Otherwise, the alternative is, passing away, they would, then they would choose the latter. Like they wouldn't want us to spend the money or whatever if it's not really going to make a difference all that much in terms of if they're, like what you said, right? If they're living, if they're just alive, or if they're actually living.
The book highlights this essentially, right? Which is the benefit and importance of actually having these conversations when something comes up, right? Let's say some sort of chronic illness comes up. Knock on wood, most people don't have to face that. But so once things start, having those conversations early so that when things get tough, right? When the patient or when your parent gets to a stage where they're not clear of mind every day, where they're maybe, you know, in surgery and you have to make an important decision. It's so helpful if the family unit has a clear picture of what everyone's preferences are and how you're going to proceed, so that when the tough question comes, you don't have to labor over it.
It's kind of like having those earthquake, fire, emergency packets ready to go. We need to talk about these things. Okay, so I want to ask you the same question, but before I do, it raised like an interesting point too about having these discussions early, because you might not agree with what your parents say or want. And then at that point, it's like, do I listen to them? Like when the time comes, right? You have to act like, it would be great if you could come to some kind of result or agreement. But what if you don't agree? What happens then?
I personally, my personality is very, very hardcore, extreme, respect the other person. I'm very conscious. I don't know. Whether it's to me a problem of ego or selfishness, it's not my life. Yeah,
it depends on the situation. Sometimes I think I would be a bit more selfish in that sense. But selfish, I mean, I don't know if it's really selfish, but I think I would have disagreements about what my parents would want versus what I would want for them. It would be a tough conversation, I think. I want to ask you the same thing, because I know my parents, maybe not as traditional in that sense. Like I said, most, I think, Asian families have that expectation that the children will eventually take care of the parents. So what do your parents think?
Yeah, I think my parents, my mom is less independent physically than my dad. I think she's in between. Rightfully and understandably wants the familial support and care. But she also, I think, understands the quote unquote burden that your parents have as well.
Would you say there's an expectation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think is fair. I think it's understandable. Which brings us to each of us. Have you considered how you want to live out in your old age? I think I kind of asked you this, but like let's unpack that a bit more. Are you going to be like your parents, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to... I feel like I would be similar to my parents, only because I just feel like the way that like I'm raised, I have a lot of similarities like to my mom. Like there's been a lot of influence from my mom or my parents on the way that I like live my life too. So I feel like along those same lines, I would think the same. Also, I think it would just be kind of fun to live in a nursing home with all your friends. Like, I just think that would be quite fun. So why need your children when you can go to a nursing home and spend all your time playing cribbage with your friends? But I've never really thought about it. Like, it's kind of hard to imagine right now. Like, not having kids, it's kind of hard to imagine how much I want to like rely on them, you know, or what my expectations are for my kids. But I do know that I would not be like at a certain point where I'm immobile. I can't really move. I can't really speak to anyone anymore. Like at that point, I would not want to like be here. So, yeah.
I do appreciate that sort of, I don't really know. And I think that's a very wise thing to say, because I also probably have the same answer as you in terms of like, oh, I don't want to, you know, be kept alive if I've just no ability to do anything much myself. But I do think that we need to stay humble enough, and I think you are in your answer. We need to stay humble enough, especially in our 30s when we're still young, to understand, especially when we're not parents yet. When there become people in your life, children and grandchildren, that you feel about in a way that you just don't understand right now because you're not a parent yet, the idea that like I can stay alive sitting in this couch or in this bed, but I get to see my grandchildren once a week, that might be enough for you to keep going. Whereas where right now you're like, I can't scuba dive, I don't want to be alive. I can't dance, I don't want to be alive. You know? So yeah, I'm not saying your answer is wrong, but it's very much, yeah, it's a good point that we don't really know until we have more life experience.
Yeah. I think it also depends on how you end up taking care of your loved ones too. Like I could see, I mean, I think some of that, my mom's mentality came from what she had to do for her parents, right? Like it was a lot of more like physical labor that she had to do. It was a lot more like, it's not burdensome to her, but you know, it's a lot more work that she had to do. And so I think that maybe even influenced how she wants to like live out her life and not putting burden on like her kids.
So I am very much like your parents. I think we're exactly the same. I want to be 100% independent. I don't want to have to rely on my kids financially, physically, or socially. So those are three very different pillars. And that's actually the biggest motivation and reason why I am passionate about health as I am now. I want to be able, it's health span versus lifespan. I want to be able to walk up a flight of stairs by myself when I'm 80 and not, you know, need someone holding me. And I want to make sure I don't fall. So my passion and the energy and time I spend on my health, exercise, as well as financially in terms of knowing my, you know, long-term investment plan is so that I have money and health when I'm old. Yeah, basically everything that your parents said. That's what I want. It's not that I don't want, like, if my kids are willing to do it or wanting to do it, that's fine. I just think that I actually approach it the same way as a partner, where my philosophy anyway is that you should go into a relationship or have a relationship where you are a whole person and the partner complements you, right? In the same way, I want to be a whole person and my kids complement me. I don't want to be like, oh, my kids are my best friends or my only friends. That's a huge burden on them, in my opinion. So I'm gonna have my own friends. Like if they come over every week, like that's great. Like I want that. That adds so much value to my life. But I don't want to have to be by myself 100% of the time unless my kids are here or visiting me, right? I think you already answered this question, but I was going to ask you, you know, do your parents expect or need you to take care of them financially? So it sounds like no. For my partner and I, we're talking about, actually, that's a question for you. Do you have life insurance?
I haven't specifically purchased life insurance, but I think I have it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You might have some basic stuff through work, right? That's same as me. I have some basic stuff through work, but certainly it's not nearly as comprehensive as if I were to purchase a dedicated life insurance plan. I know my family members do. And I think that's, you know, feeding into that conversation about how do we take care of ourselves when we're older and how do we face unexpected medical or otherwise emergencies or situations, medical bills. Yeah, I mean, it depends on, I guess your parents have made good financial and strategic decisions throughout their life that they're setting themselves up to be able to take care of themselves. But that's hard, especially in today's age with, you know, the cost of living and inflation. Medical bills are something that we don't really think about, but well, let's just put it this way. Throughout my 20s, one of the main reasons why I didn't just pursue my dream to like pack everything to a storage locker and hit the road indefinitely is because I'm like, I need to have a steady salary in case my parents have a huge medical expense that is unexpected and they need like 50K just like that. I can't responsibly just take care of myself financially anymore. It doesn't sound like your parents require you to have that safety net.
They don't require it. I mean, whether I agree with them or not is another issue, but they don't know. They haven't ever, you know, said that that's what they want us to do. But I think it's like something that everyone should be thinking about starting now, starting from whenever you start your career. Because I mean, unexpected bills, that's not just with our parents, that's with you. You never know what might happen. And that's something that probably everyone should start thinking about right now, not just in their old age, right?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Whether they require or not is maybe a moot point, because if your parents suddenly have to have this really expensive surgery, you'll want to at least contribute or support part of it, if not all of it, right? So the point that is interesting that the book makes is when there is, so this is from the book, it says, when there is no way of knowing exactly how much longer a person can live, and when we sort of blindly hope for that duration to be for as long as possible, our every impulse is to fight, to stay alive, to die with chemo in our veins and tubes in our throats. But the fact that we may be shortening or worsening the time we have left seems almost irrelevant to a lot of people. We think that we can just wait until our doctors tell us, oh, there's nothing more we can do for your parents. But nowadays, with medical technology, rarely is there nothing more that doctors can do. The author in this book was asked at one point for a patient like this who was very much on life support in different ways. You know, the child was asking, "Is are they dying?" And then it's like, well, what is it?
Yeah.
Like, is there anything more you can do for them? It's like, yeah, I can stick this other tube that will keep them even more alive. But like, what is
what do you mean by that?
there's always something more you can do. The more you do, the more expenses you incur, and the more expensive it becomes. So I think that's definitely not a straightforward situation. This sort of, I mean, this is all related, but yeah, definitely segues to the last talking point that I want to get your thoughts on, which is, I think the most common variable that we talk about when we talk about taking care of parents, which is, do they go to a nursing home? Do they not go to a nursing home? I think this is probably the most pivotal decision that we make in our 30s and 40s as our parents become less independent. Do you think your parents would be okay, would be willing to live in some sort of assisted living?
If finances were not an issue, I think they would prefer that. But I mean, it really depends on, you know, how expensive it is, how costly it is. So I think they would love to be living in a home where someone was taking care of them all the time. They didn't have to worry about anything. They got the food they need, and they didn't have to burden us, and they have everything that they need right in the nursing home. Yeah, I think they would love it if financially they could afford it.
Okay, so that's actually the interesting thing that maybe we don't recognize is you're painting a picture where, oh, the nursing home equals a place that's just as good as home, and someone's taking care of you and you don't have to do chores. That's not assisted living 99% of the time.
I disagree with what I just said. I agree with you. Like, I don't like going to a nursing home. I would imagine is probably one source of like one of the biggest disagreements that parents might have with their children, whether or not to go to a nursing home. I would imagine.
That's why I want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So if money is not a problem, you're guessing that your parents would be willing to move into some sort of nurse. I mean, not.
There's lots of different types, right?
Yeah. But the idea that you're going to be moving into a place that is not your own home because you can't take care of yourself, yay or nay?
My parents, I think, yes. For me,
what about yourself?
I acknowledge the fact that you're right. That's not how it actually works. It's not how it looks in the movies. I would enjoy the movie version of the nursing homes, but realistically, I know that that's not how it works either. So, I mean, again, I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to say, but okay, to give you an answer, because I don't want to say it. I don't want to. I'm not opposed to it. No, I would. Yes.
Yeah. If there's even a slight chance G can play cribbage with her friends all day, every day, she will at least explore that possibility.
That's right.
So one of the patients in the book, they were talking about how they have everything that they could possibly need in the home that they were moved into, but they just weren't happy. And they're like, why? And so the doctors and the family members are like, why aren't you happy? You have everything you need here. And then they're like, well, it just isn't home. And there wasn't a clear definition of, well, what do you mean by that? But I want to ask you, what do you think that would mean for you? Like, what do you think makes a home? Is it, let's say you move all your furniture over. Is that your home now? what do you think is missing for some of these people that makes them feel that it's not home?
Well, I think a lot of like people, especially when they're older, they just get lonelier. So if they don't have their family around and if they don't have, their partners or their kids around, I would imagine that they would be pretty lonely. Like if they had to move out of their home, and it's like the comfort of living in their own home in the past. Usually I feel like people go to nursing homes. One is because they can't, do things for themselves anymore. But the other reason is sometimes like they just don't have other people around anymore. Like they're the only ones in their homes. Like they don't live with their kids. They don't live with their partners anymore. So I don't know. I would imagine that it can get pretty lonely in a nursing home.
I think that's definitely, especially if home meant that you get to literally live with loved ones, 100%. I would imagine that is a factor. So I think that's a really good reason. But from what I read in the book, I really came to appreciate that there's a really key other reason that nursing homes don't feel like a home that we often don't fully understand. And it really boils down to control/freedom. So think about it this way. In your own home, right? You have your water kettle right next to your sink because that's where you like to refill your water and drink a cup of tea, and that's what you like. Let's say you put your shoes right next to your front door because that's where you put on your shoes, as opposed to maybe a shoe rack. You're like, I don't want to put my shoes in a shoe rack. Let's say you like to eat breakfast at 10 a.m. because you like to work out first. Okay, then you just make breakfast whenever you want, so on and so forth. So you see maybe where I'm going with this. All these little decisions we make about how we live our life, you oftentimes do not have that same control, not nearly that same control in a nursing home. And that's often what makes nursing homes and care homes not feel like home, is that you are being controlled and you're being nanny, because the number one objective of most of these nursing homes is safety. You put your parent in a nursing home because you trust that they will be taken care of and that they will remember to take their medications and that they will be bathed and that they will eat on time. All these things, they will be safe and healthy. That's why you pay all this money to put your parent in a nursing home. But at what cost? So remember earlier you were talking about, oftentimes it's what the parent wants versus what the child wants, right? So this is where it really comes to a head. And what's so interesting is the book mentioned how assisted living is almost always built for the sake of the children, because it's the child that decides if and where the parent lives in a nursing home. So if you look at a lot of these nursing home and care home sort of brochures and marketing, it will show things like, ooh, look at this beautiful architecture, or this like hotel-like entryway. Look how nice this place looks. Oh, we have a computer lab. You can use computers. We have an exercise center. Oh, we take you to go on trips to concerts and to go to museums and little fun field trips. These are all things that a middle-aged person wants. Not what an 80-year-old wants. And you look at that as someone in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, and like, wow, that sounds like an amazing place to live. Let me make sure put my parent there. They're going to have a great life, because that's what I think a good life is like. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I don't know that, like, do you think 70 or 80-year-olds would want that? Like, would care about that?
Control?
That kind of control? Yeah.
Yes. I think so.
You think that would be really important to them?
Well, based on the book, I don't know. It is. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess it might be different for everybody, and probably different across nursing homes too. I don't really know if that's something that they would really care about.
So, I mean, okay. So another point.
I could see it though.
Is the book says, so we want autonomy for ourselves, but we want safety for those that we love. Many things that we want for those that we care about, we would adamantly oppose for ourselves, because we would feel that it would infringe upon our sense of self.
As an old person, like, I would want myself to be safe too. Like, I would want all the safeguards in place so that I don't trip and fall. And like, that's why I would want to go to a nursing home too. So
I think just think about it. A lot our parents, right? Our parents often nag us. They don't want you to go to Burning Man. They don't want you to take drugs at a rave. They don't want you to get blackout drunk and like throw up all night. If they had it their way, you're not allowed to do any of those things. They don't want you to ride a
But
motorcycle.
we want it.
They don't want you to ride a motorcycle. They don't want you to go
Right.
skydiving because all these things are unsafe.
Yeah, I'm just thinking my mentality would be different than like an 80-year-old's. But depending on the type of nursing home, I mean, if you're that restricted, then fine. I could totally see why people would be miserable in that kind of setting where like everything you do is controlled because it's for your safety. I mean, that almost seems like it's kind of like a jail.
If there's anyone listening whose parents are in some sort of assisted living facility, we would love to sort of know more about what that looks like. Is it as bleak as I say? I mean, anecdotally, I'm sure we can find places that are not like that, but
Like I've been to one, for example, and it was
they're playing cribbage.
it was fine. Like, well, they're not playing. No, she wasn't playing cribbage, but she had her own apartment. She just has like there's nurses around to assist if she needs, but otherwise she's free to do whatever.
So that was one of the models that was really good, where you're living in a building, you have your own private space. No one is in your space. You wake up whenever you want. It's just when you need help, and maybe like a few times throughout the day, someone will come in and just like help you with certain things or check in on you. That would be great.
And I mean, it also just depends on how like mobile you are, right? How much you're able to move too. So I could see there's a whole different like levels of care. You might have some places where you need care like 24/7, like almost at a hospital, and some where you can just kind of live on your own and not have too much help or support. So depending on your need, depending on the level of your capabilities and the nursing home, I'm sure there's such a range. But I could see like the example that they give in the book, I could see that's why people would not enjoy it.
Yeah, I think it's a very common thing once you get to a certain age, and it's tough, right? It's tough. It's challenging. You have that push and pull between your desires and your parents' desires.
If you were given the gift of immortality, but you had to be 80 for the rest of your life, would you take it?
No.
Oh, okay.
Easy. Oh, final would you rather question.
Okay.
Would you rather have a physical body of a 30-year-old, but the mind of a 90-year-old? Or would you rather have the other way, the mind of a 90-year-old and a body of a 90-year-old? Body of a 30-year-old. Anyways, so would you rather be old and like mentally sharp, or would you be like kind of senile, but like you can still run a mile?
Probably the physical. I'll have the physical of a young person.
Okay, so like
the physical body of a young person.
She's going to be like running at 5 a.m., but you won't know how to get back home.
Yeah. I'll forget every other sentence, but I'll be able to like lift some weights and
yeah. You'll be able to play with the kids, but you don't know if they're your kids or if they're someone else's kids.
What about you? You would take the mind?
I don't know.
Okay, you go away and make a pros and cons list, and then come back next time.
I would take the mind.
You would take the mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for tuning in.
I would actually be really interested to hear what your like parents' expectations of you are. I'm just quite curious. So please let us know.
Okay. Until next time. See ya, everyone.
Bye.